Welcome back. So I understand that you guys have been reading about the American justice system. Now, in the American Constitution, it says that there should be freedom and justice for all people in America. However, some people question if everyone in America really gets the same freedom and justice. So today we're going to look at a person that many people feel is a classic example of someone who did not get fair treatment in our justice system. So that person's name is Stan Tookie Williams. Tookie is actually his nickname, but that's what most people call him. So what we're going to do today is first I'll give you some background information about Tookie. And then we will look at the actual court case that he was involved in and the punishment and what happened to him while he was in prison. And we'll finish with a few questions. So, Tookie was born in 1953. His mother was only 17 years old when he was born, and there was no father figure in his life. So from the beginning, Tookie had a very weak family background. When he was about 6, he moved with his mother to Los Angeles, and he immediately got into the street life in Los Angeles, even though he was very young. And he learned early on that as a young black boy that he needed to be strong and tough in order to survive. And he felt like school was not going to give him the education that he needed. So that's why he rarely went to school. And he was on the streets looking at these older black men and how they lived and how tough they were and what they did. And that was his role model, right? Because he had no father. So even as a young child, he learned that one way he could make money on the streets was to fight other kids. And if he won, he got the money. So you can see that just from a very young age, Tookie is off to a bad start in life. When he was a teenager in 1969, he met a friend and they formed a gang called the Crips. So let's take a moment to discuss what a gang is. A gang is an organized group of criminals. There are basically two purposes to a gang. One is to provide protection for the gang members and for their families, and to give kind of a sense of belonging. So in some ways, a gang is like a family, and that is why it usually attracts people who don't have a strong family background, so people like Tookie. Now, the other purpose of a gang is to make money, right, to provide for the gang members. And usually this is done illegally. So gangs usually make money by selling drugs, by prostitution, robbery. So in general, illegal ways to make money. So he started this gang with his friend in 1969, and originally, at the beginning, there were only 30 members. However, within 10 years, this gang, the Crips, spread all the way across the state of California. And it ended up spreading throughout America and the entire world. So Tookie really, he started something that became huge. Unfortunately, it wasn't a good thing. In 1979, so 10 years after he started this gang, he was arrested for murdering 4 people. Now, it's important to keep in mind that Tookie had committed a lot of crimes before he got arrested in 1979. And certainly the police in Los Angeles, they knew who he was, and they definitely wanted to get him for something. He is leading the biggest gang in Los Angeles, right? He's not a good guy. So they were finally able to get him for the murder of 4 people. However, this is where we have to question the justice system. So many people feel like Tookie did not get a fair trial for several reasons. They feel that, in general, there was a lot of racism and problems against him. So the reason why people think that his trial was unfair is, first, the trial was not set in Los Angeles. So again, remember, that's where Tookie lived, was in Los Angeles. There are people from lots of different races who live in Los Angeles. However, the trial for Tookie took place outside of Los Angeles and it was in a place that was, mostly white people. So it wasn't similar to where he lived. Now, in addition to that, in America, you are supposed to be judged by a jury, so that will be 12 people who have something in common with you. So we call them your peers. So this could mean, they're a similar age, they have some background in common with you. However, again, these people came from a very different area than Tookie came from. And also, they were a different race. So there were no African Americans on the jury. And many people feel that this was racist. They feel like, he should have had at least a couple, 2 or 3 African Americans on the jury making the decision about whether or not he was guilty. And the final reason why people feel like his trial was not fair is the actual evidence they had against him. The evidence was really weak. So basically, what they had to say that he had murdered these 4 people was they found a bullet at the crime scene that they matched to one of his guns. But people questioned the science that they used to match the bullet to the gun. So we can't be sure that that bullet really came from his gun. And here's the thing. Even if the bullet did come from his gun, it doesn't mean that he shot the person, right? Anybody could have been, using that gun. So that was one issue with the evidence. The other thing that they had was they had 4 witnesses who all said that Tookie did it. But here's the problem. All 4 witnesses were criminals, and they had something to benefit by getting up there in that trial and saying that he did it. So the government offered them deals. So basically the government told these 4 people, hey, you're a criminal and we're going to take you to court. But if you get up here and say that Tookie did this, we will give you a lower punishment. Or to some of them, they said, we won't give you any punishment for the crime you just committed. So you can see that these 4 witnesses, first, they're not trustworthy people. They're criminals. And second, they had a lot to gain by lying. If they lied, we don't know for sure, but they had a lot to gain by saying that he did it. So, not surprisingly, the jury did decide he was guilty, and he was sentenced to the death penalty, which means that he's going to be killed as punishment. Now, in America, the death penalty does not happen immediately. So usually a person will sit in prison on what's called death row and wait for 10, 20 years before they actually are killed as their punishment. So now let's look at what happened while he was in prison. And this is where things get really interesting. So again, we know, from the time he was a child, Tookie was a fighter. So it's not a surprise that as soon as he got to prison, he started fighting with other prisoners and even the guards. And so because of these fights, they put him in solitary confinement. And that's when they make a person stay in a very small room, so maybe the size of a small bathroom. That's where they live, and they don't get to talk to other people. That's why it's called solitary confinement. You're alone all day and all night. So solitary confinement really changes people, usually in a bad way. However, for Tookie, it ended up not being a bad thing. So he was in there and he started to think. And he asked for books, and they brought him books. And he read and read and read everything he could read. He read the Bible. He read the dictionary. He read autobiographies. He read history books. And he thought about how he ended up in this place. And he realized that he wanted to make sure that other people did not follow the same life path that he did. So he started doing some different things to redeem himself or to make up for the bad things he had done in the past. So at this time, now we're in the early 1990s, there was a huge gang war going on between the Crips, the gang he started, and the Bloods, their enemy gang. And he recorded a message of peace Because again, he was really respected. I mean, he's like the godfather of all of these gangs. So even the enemy gang really respected Tookie. So he wrote and recorded himself giving this message of peace to try to end this war between these two gangs. And people invited gang members from both the Crips and the Bloods to come into the same room at the same time and watch his message of peace. Now that's a big deal, right? Because usually when you have Crips and Bloods in the same room, especially during this gang war, they're going to fight or they're going to kill each other. So he did a lot to promote peace between these two gangs. He also wrote a lot of books, including a series of children's books. So you can see some pictures here of some of the titles. So one is Gangs and Wanting to Belong. The other one is Gangs and Drugs. And there's many others. And the purpose of these books was to keep kids away from gangs and to get kids at a young age to understand why they should not join a gang. And just like the Crips gang that he started that spread worldwide, these books that he wrote also spread worldwide. So children in America were reading them. Children in South Africa were reading them. He was making a positive difference now. You know, the beginning of his life, he was making a very negative difference in the world. Now he's making a very positive difference in the world. And that's kind of the idea behind this big word, redemption, right? You're making up for bad things you did in the past. He also wrote an autobiography about his life called Blue Rage, Black Redemption, and he wrote a book called Life in Prison. So this book, he's describing what it's like to be in prison. And so the purpose here was to get other people to read this book and realize if they were following the same path that he had followed, that they shouldn't make those same choices he made. So it's kind of a warning to people, hey, if you want to follow this criminal lifestyle and be in a gang, this is where you're going to end up, and you don't want to be here. So Stan Tookie Williams, for all these books he wrote, especially the children's books, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Now this is amazing. He is the only death row inmate to ever have been nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. And this caused a lot of people to push for mercy, to push for them to change his sentence and not kill him. So, you know, there is the possibility to take away the death penalty. After you've told somebody, okay, you're going to get the death penalty, you can change it to life in prison. And many people were pushing that Tookie should receive this change, one, because the trial wasn't fair, and two, because of how he had redeemed himself in prison. So Stan Tookie Williams is an important guy because he raises a lot of questions about American society and about our justice system. One question is, was he really guilty of the murders? So many people advised Tookie to confess to these murders, say, yes, I killed the 4 people and I feel sorry. They told Tookie that it was more likely that they would take away the death penalty if he said that. However, Tookie refused. He said, you know, up to the end, he always said that he did not kill those 4 people. And he was not going to lie and say that he did, even if that lie would save his life. So another question related to that is, does it matter if he's guilty of these murders? I mean, he did a lot of bad stuff. He started a gang that spread worldwide. Even if he never killed anybody himself, he was really indirectly responsible for a lot of deaths, right? You know, maybe a gang war between the Bloods and the Crips could not have happened if he hadn't started the Crips gang to begin with. So does it really matter if he killed those 4 people or not? He was responsible for a lot of bad things. Another question, though, is should these actions, so the things that he did in prison, writing these books and trying to promote peace, should that change his punishment? You know, should the government consider these things when they decide whether or not to remove the death penalty for him? And finally, it brings up a lot of questions about the death penalty, which is a very controversial issue in America. So it makes people wonder, what is the purpose of the death penalty? Is it to punish someone for their crimes? Or is it to get rid of someone who is doing more harm than good in society? Or is it to get rid of someone who cannot make themselves better? Because it seems like Tookie made himself better. So there's a lot of questions surrounding Stan Tookie Williams and his trial and whether or not it was fair. And one question that you may have is, so did they? Did they remove the death penalty or did they kill him? And I am not going to answer that question. You're going to have to go find the answers yourselves.